There is a specific kind of silence that you only find at 3:00 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. It's not peaceful, it's heavy. It presses against your ears like water. I used to tell myself that the extra $2 an hour for the graveyard shift was worth the messed up sleep schedule. But after last Tuesday, I know I was lying to myself. You don't take this job because of the money. You take it because you think nothing ever happens in a town this small. I thought the worst thing I'd have to deal with was a drunk trucker or a broken slushy machine. I was wrong. I was dead wrong. I used to work, at a gas station off a lonely stretch of I-70. It's one of those 24-hour spots that feels like a brightly lit fishbowl surrounded by an ocean of pitch-black forest. Inside, it's all fluorescent hum and the smell of floor cleaner. Outside, it's just darkness. That night started normal enough. I was sitting behind the counter, scrolling through Reddit on my phone, trying to ignore the buzzing of the overhead lights. There hadn't been a customer in 2 hours. Around 3:15 a.m., a car pulled onto the lot. It didn't drive up quickly or normally. It rolled in slowly, crunching over the gravel with its headlights off. It was an older model sedan, maybe a beige Toyota, caked in mud so thick you couldn't read the plate. It stopped at pump number 4, the one furthest from the store, right at the edge of the darkness. I watched the driver's side door. Nothing happened. No one got out. The car just sat there dead still. My chest tightened a little. We get weirdos out here, sure, but usually they want gas or cigarettes. Loitering is different. I kept my eyes glued to the security monitor under the counter. The camera on pump 4 is grainy and flickers sometimes, but I could clearly see the silhouette of a person sitting in the driver's seat. They weren't moving. They were just facing the store, facing me. After 5 minutes, I started getting that prickly feeling on the back of my neck. I grabbed the store phone, debating whether to call the non-emergency line, just to be safe. That's when the car door finally opened. The man who stepped out was tall, abnormally tall. He wore a gray suit that looked 2 sizes too big for him, the fabric hanging loosely off his thin frame. He didn't look at the pump. He didn't look at his car. He turned and began walking toward the glass doors of the station. His walk was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. He lifted his knees too high with each step, like a marionette puppet being controlled by someone who didn't know how human joints worked. But it was his face that made my blood run cold. He was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a wide, rigid grin that stretched too far across his face, showing way too many teeth. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, staring straight at me through the glass before he even reached the door. I instinctively checked the lock button under the counter, but the chime sounded. The automatic doors slid open. I had forgotten to lock them. He walked in, the smell of wet earth and copper filling the small space immediately. The air conditioner seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't walk to the aisles. He walked straight to the counter, stopping inches from the plexiglass barrier. "Good evening, Tyler," he said. His voice was smooth, deep, and sounded like a radio announcer, completely mismatched with his erratic appearance. I froze. I wasn't wearing a name tag. Can I help you, sir?" I managed to stammer, my hand trembling as I gripped the phone below the counter. He didn't blink. His eyes were watery and pale blue, rimmed with red. "I am just browsing," he said, his smile never faltering, never twitching, just looking at the selection. He turned sharply like a soldier and marched toward the back of the store where the coolers were. I watched him on the monitors. He didn't open a single door. He stood in front of the dairy section, staring at the milk cartons, swaying slightly back and forth. I dialed 911. I kept the phone below the counter, whispering, "I'm at the Shell off exit 42. There's a man acting strange. He knows my name. I'm scared." The dispatcher told me a unit was 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. In a place like this, 20 minutes is a lifetime. On the monitor, the man turned around. He looked directly up into the security camera lens in the corner of the ceiling. He waved, a stiff, mechanical wave. Then he started walking back toward the counter. I dropped the phone, pretending to wipe down the register. He stopped at the counter again. He placed a single pack of gum on the surface. "Will that be all?" I asked, my voice cracked. "For now," he said. He leaned in closer, his forehead pressing against the plexiglass. "You have a lovely home, Tyler, the blue house on Elm Street, the one with the broken porch light." My heart hammered so hard I thought I was going to pass out. That was my house. The porch light had burned out yesterday morning. I hadn't told anyone. "Who are you?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just tapped his long, dirty fingernail against the glass 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. "Keep the change," he said, though he hadn't given me any money. He turned and did that high-step walk out the door. I watched him get back into his muddy car. He didn't turn on the headlights. He just reversed out of the spot and rolled away into the darkness of the highway. As soon as his taillights vanished, I ran to the door and locked it. I collapsed onto the floor behind the counter, shaking uncontrollably. I waited there until the state trooper arrived. I told him everything. He took a report, looked around the lot, and told me to go home and get some rest. He said it was probably just a prank or some drifter trying to scare a kid. I wanted to believe him. I really did. Before I left, my manager called and told me I had to close out the register and email him the security footage of the incident for insurance reasons. I went into the back office and pulled up the files. I rewound the tape to 3:15 a.m. I watched the muddy car pull up. I watched the man get out. I watched him walk in. But then I saw something I had missed in real time. When the man was standing at the counter talking to me, distracting me with his smile and his terrifying knowledge of my life, I was staring solely at him. I was paralyzed by him. But on the wide-angle security camera, you could see the rest of the store. While the smiling man was leaning against the glass, whispering about my house, the back emergency door of the store, the one behind the slushy machines, slowly creaked open. Another figure crawled in. This one was small, dressed in all black, moving on all 4s like a spider. It scrambled silently along the floor, hidden by the aisles, while the smiling man held my attention. The figure moved behind the counter, right past my legs while I was on the phone with 911, and slipped into the storage closet that connects to the office I was currently sitting in. I paused the video. My blood turned to ice. I looked at the timestamp. The second figure never left. The smiling man was just the distraction. If you have ever worked a graveyard shift, you know exactly what I am talking about when I say that 3 a.m. feels different than any other time of day. It is not just quiet, it is heavy. The air feels thicker, the lights buzz louder, and your brain starts playing tricks on you. I used to think the worst part of working nights at a 24-hour diner was the drunk college kids or the rude truckers. I was wrong. The worst part is when the place is empty, and you realize you are basically a goldfish in a lit-up bowl, and the rest of the world is just darkness looking in at you. I need to tell this story because I quit my job this morning, and I am never stepping foot in that building again. I just need someone to believe me. My name is Chris, and I worked at a place called Denny's Diner off I-95. It's one of those spots that smells permanently of bacon grease and floor wax. Last night, it was dead. Just me and the cook, Marco. Marco is a good guy, but he spends most of his shift in the back prep room listening to podcasts with his headphones on, so I am usually alone out front. Around 3:15 a.m., the door chime rang. It is a loud, annoying electronic ding-dong sound that cuts right through the silence. I looked up from my phone, expecting a cop or a straggler from the bars. A man walked in. He was wearing a heavy, dark green rain jacket, which was weird because it hadn't rained in 3 weeks. The hood was up, casting a shadow over his face. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the menu board. He walked straight to the back corner booth, the one furthest from the entrance and the kitchen. He walked stiffly. That is the only way I can describe it. He moved like his knees didn't want to bend, dragging his feet slightly on the linoleum. I grabbed a menu and a pot of coffee and walked over. When I got to his table, he was already staring out the window into the pitch-black parking lot. I couldn't see his eyes, just the pale skin of his jaw and a thin, tight mouth. "Welcome to Denny," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Can I get you started with some coffee?" He didn't turn his head, he just gave a tiny nod. I poured the cup. The steam rose up and I caught a smell coming off him. It wasn't body odor. It smelled like wet dirt. You know that smell when you dig a hole in the backyard? Damp, cold earth. It made my stomach turn. "I'll give you a minute to look at the menu," I said. He didn't respond. He just sat there statue still. I walked back behind the counter and started wiping down the soda fountains. I kept glancing over at him. He hadn't moved. He hadn't touched the coffee. He hadn't taken his hood down. He was just a dark shape in the corner. About 10 minutes passed. I went into the back to grab a box of napkins from the storage shelf. I shouted hey to Marco, who gave me a thumbs up without taking his headphones off. I was gone for maybe 45 seconds. When I came back out, the diner was empty. I stopped dead in my tracks. The front door was closed. The chime hadn't rung. I would have heard it. That thing is loud enough to wake the dead. I looked at the corner booth. The coffee cup was still there, full to the brim, steam no longer rising, but the man was gone. I walked over to the table. No money left on the table. No wet footprints leading to the door, just the cup. I checked the bathroom. I pushed the door open and called out. Empty. The lights were flickering in there like they always do, but the stalls were wide open. He must have slipped out while I was grabbing the napkins, I told myself. Maybe he caught the door before it could chime. People do weird things at night. But the feeling in my gut was wrong. I felt like I was being watched. The hairs on my arms were standing straight up. I went back to the register, but I couldn't shake it. I decided to check the security cameras. The monitor is kept in the manager's office, which is just a tiny closet-sized room behind the kitchen. I told Marco I was taking a 5-minute break and went inside. I rewound the footage to 3:25 a.m. I saw myself walk into the back for the napkins. On the screen, the man in the corner booth sat perfectly still for another 10 seconds. Then he moved. He didn't stand up. He didn't slide out of the booth like a normal person. He slumped forward, melting under the table. It looked unnatural, like his bones had just dissolved. He slid onto the floor on his hands and knees. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. On the grainy black and white footage, the man began to crawl. He crawled fast, scuttling like a spider, keeping low to the ground so he stayed hidden behind the half walls of the booths. He wasn't crawling toward the front door. He was crawling toward the counter. I watched in horror as he slithered right past the register where I usually stand. He moved into the kitchen area. He didn't leave. I checked the timestamp. This was 3 minutes ago. I switched camera views to the kitchen cam. I saw myself come back out with the napkins, but just seconds before I entered the frame, the man on the floor scrambled behind the large stainless steel prep table. He was hiding in the kitchen. I froze. I was sitting in the office. The office is in the back of the kitchen. The only way in or out is through the kitchen. I looked at the monitor again. The kitchen camera showed Marco chopping vegetables, totally oblivious with his headphones on. And behind him, in the shadows between the ice machine and the wall, I saw a pair of legs, the green rain jacket. He was standing there, right now. I couldn't breathe. My hand hovered over the phone on the desk to call 911, but I was terrified that if I made a sound, he would hear me. Then on the screen, I saw the man move again. He stepped out from the shadows. He wasn't looking at Marco. He was looking directly at the office door, the door I was sitting behind. He took a step toward the office, then another. I spun around in my chair. and locked the office door just as the handle jiggled. It wasn't a frantic jiggle, it was slow, deliberate. "Marco," I screamed. "Marco, behind you." I looked back at the screen. Marco had finally turned around, probably sensing the vibration of me slamming the lock. I saw Marco's face go pale. He dropped his knife. But the man in the rain jacket wasn't attacking him. The man wasn't even looking at him. The man was pressing his face against the wood of my office door. On the monitor, I could see his face for the first time. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. His face was blank, completely devoid of emotion. But his eyes were rolled back so far I could only see the whites. "Open the door, Chris," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the monitor. It came from the other side of the wood, inches from my head. I scrambled back into the corner of the tiny room, dialing 911 on my cell phone. "I have a message for you," the voice rasped. It sounded wet. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, screaming that there was an intruder. Outside, I heard Marco yelling, then the sound of the back door slamming open as he ran for his life. Smart kid. For the next 5 minutes, the man didn't try to break the door down. He just scratched at it. Long, slow scratches, like a dog wanting to be let in. Then the scratching stopped. I watched the monitor. The kitchen was empty. The back door was swinging in the wind. When the police arrived, they cleared the building. They found Marco shivering by the dumpster outside. They found me locked in the office. But they didn't find the man. They reviewed the footage. They saw him enter. They saw him crawl. They saw him stand outside my door. But here is the part that made the blood drain from the officer's face. On the video, after Marco ran out, the man didn't leave through the back door. He didn't go out the front. He looked up at the ceiling tiles above the prep table. He stood on the stainless steel counter, pushed a tile aside, and pulled himself up into the ceiling space. The police searched the roof. They searched the crawl space. They found disturbed dust and a few wet, muddy handprints near the vents, but nobody was up there. They told me he must have found a way out through the HVAC unit on the roof, but they looked confused. The vents are too small for a human to fit through. I gave my statement and went home. I locked every door and window in my apartment. I sat on my couch with a baseball bat, staring at the ceiling. Because about an hour ago, I heard a sound. It was faint, coming from the attic vent in my hallway. It sounded like fingernails scratching against metal. I live 5 miles from the diner. There is no way he could know where I live. There is no way he could be here. But then I remembered the coffee. I remembered that I never gave him a check. I never told him my name. So why did he whisper Chris through the door? I am not looking in the vents. I'm just going to sit here and wait for the sun to come up. And if you work the night shift, do me a favor. If the door chime doesn't ring but you feel like someone is there, don't look, just run. They tell you the hardest part of the graveyard shift is staying awake. They're lying. The hardest part is ignoring what you see on the monitors when you know for a fact the building is totally empty. I need to get this down while it's fresh, before my brain tries to convince me it didn't happen. I quit my job this morning. I left my badge on the desk and didn't even wait for my manager, Dave, to get in. I'm currently sitting in my apartment with every light on, and I still can't stop shaking. For the last 8 months, I've worked security at a massive distribution center outside of Columbus. It's easy work. The place is a ghost town from roughly midnight to 5 a.m. It's just miles of high-stacked pallets, conveyor belts that look like sleeping metal snakes, and the constant, droning hum of the industrial refrigerators. My job is mostly sitting in the main guard booth, watching a wall of 24 CCTV monitors, drinking bad coffee, and listening to podcasts. Last night started normal. I did my first round at 1 a.m., shining my flashlight down long, dark aisles that smelled like cardboard and dust. Everything was clear. I got back to the booth, settled into my chair, and started scrolling through my phone. It was around 2:45 a.m. when I noticed it. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye on monitor 9. That camera covers section G, the overflow storage area at the far back of the warehouse. It's rarely used. I leaned in, squinting at the grainy black and white feed. At first, I thought it was a raccoon or maybe a stray cat that got in through a loading bay door. We get those sometimes. But then it moved again, stepping out from behind a stack of shrink-wrapped crates. It wasn't an animal. It was tall, bizarrely tall. It had to be pushing 7 feet. It was just standing there in the middle of the aisle, perfectly still. My stomach dropped. We were on lockdown. Nobody was supposed to be in there. I grabbed my radio, my thumb hovering over the transmit button to call the cops. But I hesitated. Dave had chewed me out last month for calling 911 on a cleaning crew member I didn't know was scheduled. I zoomed the camera in. The tech is old, so the image got blurry, but I could make out more details. The figure was wearing clothes that were way too big, hanging off its frame like rags on a stick. It looked like an old, torn jumpsuit. I watched it for 5 full minutes. It didn't twitch. It didn't shift its weight. It just stood there, facing away from the camera towards a blank concrete wall. It was unnatural. Then things got worse. The figure didn't turn around. It just started bending backward, slowly, way past the point a human spine should be able to bend. It leaned back until its head was almost touching the back of its knees, like some horrible, broken contortionist. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. This wasn't a prank. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and my baton. I had to go check. It's the job, right? I locked the booth door behind me and started the long walk to section G. The warehouse feels different when you know something else is in there with you. The silence felt heavier. The echo of my own boots on the concrete sounded like gunshots. Every shadow looked like it was moving. It took me 10 minutes to get back there. I unholstered my baton, my heart hammering against my ribs. I rounded the corner into the aisle I'd seen on the monitor. I shone my light beam down the corridor. Empty. There was nothing there, no tall figure, no torn jumpsuit. I walked right up to the spot where it had been standing. There was a thick layer of dust on the floor. It was completely undisturbed. No footprints. I felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by confusion. I knew what I saw. I ran back to the security booth, needing to see the replay. I burst back into the booth and slammed the door. I looked up at the wall of monitors. The figure was back on monitor 9. It was in the exact same spot, but it wasn't bending backward anymore. Now it was facing the camera. I froze, staring at the screen. It didn't have a face. Where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should be, there was just smooth, pale skin like mannequin plastic that had melted slightly. As I watched, horrified, the faceless thing raised one long, spindly arm. It pointed a finger directly at the camera lens. And then it began to walk. It didn't walk like a person. It jerked forward, its limbs snapping into place stiffly with each step, moving way too fast. It closed the distance to the camera in seconds, filling the screen with that awful, blank face before the feed abruptly cut to static. I panicked. I reached for the landline to call the police, finally done with hesitation. That's when I heard it. It was a sound coming from the hallway, right outside my security booth. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It sounded heavy and wet, like something dragging a sack of meat across the linoleum floor. I spun around in my chair, staring at the reinforced metal door of my booth. There's no window in the door, just a small peephole. The dragging sound stopped right outside the door. I held my breath. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Then there was a soft tap on the metal. Tap, followed by another. Tap, tap. I looked back at the monitors. Monitor 9 was still static. I checked the monitor for the hallway outside my door. It showed the hallway was completely empty. But the tapping continued, growing louder, more impatient. I realized then that the camera outside my door has a blind spot directly underneath it. Something was standing right there, inches away from me, separated only by a metal door. I crawled under the desk, clutching my baton, and dialed 911 on my cell phone, whispering frantically to the dispatcher. The tapping stopped. A voice came from the other side of the door. It didn't sound human. It sounded like stones grinding together in a mixer, trying to form words. "Dave said you were in here, Tyler," the voice rasped. My blood ran cold. Dave is my manager, and he never told anyone my name. I stayed under that desk until the cops arrived 15 minutes later. They cleared the building. They found nothing. No intruder, no signs of forced entry. They looked at me like I was crazy, another burnt-out night guard seeing things in the dark. When I went back into the booth to get my things to leave, I tried to pull up the footage from 2:45 a.m. to show them. It was gone. The hard drive had been wiped clean for that entire hour. I don't know what was in that warehouse. I don't know how it knew my name, but I know one thing for sure. When I was leaving, walking out to my car in the early morning light, I looked back at the massive building one last time. On the roof, near the edge, I saw a tall, thin silhouette standing perfectly still against the brightening sky. I didn't stop. I just got in my car and drove, and I'm never going back to work in the dark again.